For 8 years, I ran every kitchen in my father-in-law's restaurant group. Yesterday, his son handed me a box and told me I was no longer aligned with the brand vision. I set the box down on the pass-through counter, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "You have until Sunday brunch service to figure out what aligned with the brand vision actually means when none of your cooks can get paid." He laughed. He actually laughed, so I walked out. And by Monday morning, 43 restaurant employees couldn't clock in. 3 health department permits had lapsed because the renewal paperwork lived in my system. And the Sunday brunch that his new girlfriend was supposed to oversee creatively turned into the single worst service in the 12-year history of Hargrove Hospitality Group. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got there, you need to understand what I was before any of this happened, what I'd made myself into, and what it cost me. My name is Maya Chen, and I spent 8 years building something that wasn't mine. I was 24 when I met Daniel Hargrove at a culinary industry conference in Nashville. He was presenting a panel on scaling regional restaurant concepts. I was there on a scholarship I'd applied for 3 times before finally getting it, sitting in the back row in the one blazer I owned, taking notes on my phone because I couldn't afford the conference notebook they sold in the lobby. Daniel was 62 then, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, the kind of man who took up space without trying. He'd started Hargrove Hospitality with a single barbecue shack in Knoxville when he was 29. By the time I met him, he had 7 restaurants across Tennessee and northern Georgia, a loyal regional following, and a staffing problem that was quietly bleeding him dry. After his panel, I waited until the crowd thinned and walked up and told him exactly what was wrong with his scheduling model. Not rudely, just honestly. I'd done the math on the back of my conference program during his presentation. The labor cost overlap between his AM and PM shifts was eating somewhere around 11% of his weekly margin per location, based on the numbers he'd shared publicly. He could recover most of it with a staggered transition model and cross-trained utility positions. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Who do you work for?" I told him nobody currently. He bought me a cup of coffee and asked me 3 questions. Could I build systems from scratch? Could I keep my mouth shut about things that didn't need to leave the building? And did I actually understand kitchens, not just spreadsheets? I said yes to all 3. 2 of those answers were completely true. He offered me a job before the coffee was gone. I was hired as operations coordinator, which was a title that meant almost nothing but gave me access to everything. I was supposed to standardize Daniel's scheduling across all 7 locations, clean up the payroll process, and help him figure out why his food costs kept running 3 points higher than projected. What I actually did over the next 8 years was become the connective tissue of the entire company. The food cost problem turned out to be a vendor issue. 2 of his suppliers had been quietly shorting deliveries for over a year, betting that nobody was watching closely enough to notice. I caught it within my first 6 weeks by cross-referencing invoice weights against the inventory counts his kitchen managers were logging. I built a tracking system to flag discrepancies automatically. Daniel called me into his office, looked at my report, and said, "You just saved me $40,000 a year." Then he said, "What else do you see?" So I told him, I built PulseTrack. That's what I called it internally in the files I kept on my personal laptop before migrating everything to the company server. It started as a scheduling tool and grew into something much larger: payroll integration, vendor management, health permit calendaring with automatic renewal reminders, staff certification tracking, food handler cards, serve safe, liquor license compliance, incident reporting, equipment maintenance logs, tip pooling calculations that actually held up to legal scrutiny, which Daniel's previous system absolutely did not. Every piece of information that mattered to the operation of Hargrove Hospitality eventually flowed through PulseTrack, and PulseTrack ran through me. I want to be clear about something because I've had a lot of time to think about this. I didn't build it that way to make myself impossible to remove. I built it that way because I was the only one who understood all the pieces. The scheduling logic had to talk to the payroll module, which had to account for Tennessee's tip credit laws, which were different from Georgia's, which affected how we structured front-of-house labor in the Chattanooga location versus the ones in Atlanta. You can't hand that to a committee. You need one person who holds the whole map in their head. I was that person. Daniel understood this. He'd been running restaurants long enough to know the difference between someone who's indispensable because they're genuinely skilled and someone who's indispensable because they're holding information. He trusted me because I never hid the work. I documented everything. I trained his managers extensively. The system was mine in the sense that I built it, but I never tried to make it mysterious. Over 8 years, Hargrove Hospitality grew from 7 locations to 22. We expanded into Asheville, Charlotte, Lexington. We added a catering division. We opened the fast casual concept that failed, which was painful, and a weekend brunch flagship in Nashville that became the highest grossing location in the group, which was not. Daniel promoted me twice. By year 5, my title was Director of Operations, and I had a staff of 4, 2 regional coordinators, a compliance specialist, and an assistant whose name was Pia and who was genuinely the most organized human being I have ever encountered. My salary was comfortable, not exceptional, but comfortable. I had benefits, a modest bonus structure, and an understanding with Daniel that as long as I kept things running, I had full autonomy over how I ran them. What I did not have was equity, or a contract, or, as it would turn out, any protection whatsoever when the situation changed. My personal life contracted in ways I didn't notice until the contraction was complete. I had friends in the industry but no close ones. We saw each other at events, texted occasionally, never reached the kind of depth that requires consistent presence. I dated a lime cook named Marcus for about 4 months in year 3. He was funny and kind, and completely unable to understand why I answered work emails at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. He eventually stopped texting, and I told myself I was too busy to chase it down. What I meant was that I had already replaced him emotionally with a spreadsheet that was giving me problems. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that I'd moved into 6 years earlier and never really settled into. The walls were the original rental white. The furniture was mostly things I'd bought quickly out of necessity and kept, because replacing them would require time I didn't have. My kitchen, and this is embarrassing given my profession, contained mostly takeout containers and a coffee maker I treated like a medical device. I was fine with it. Or I told myself I was fine with it. I had a purpose. I had a function. I was the reason 22 restaurants ran smoothly, the reason 340 people got correct paychecks every 2 weeks, the reason Daniel Hargrove's dream was still standing after 12 years. That felt like enough. It stopped feeling like enough the day Daniel's son walked through the door and announced he was coming home to be part of the family business. His name was Tyler. He was 31, which was only 3 years younger than me, but the gap felt much wider. He'd spent the previous 6 years in Los Angeles doing various things, a stint at a talent management company that went under, a consulting practice for restaurant concepts that I could find no evidence of online, a brief period running a pop-up dinner series that his Instagram documented extensively but whose business structure remained unclear. He was handsome in the way of someone who has never worried about money. His clothes were always a little too expensive for wherever he was wearing them. I met him on a Tuesday morning. He walked into my office, the one Daniel had given me 3 years earlier with the window facing the back parking lot, sat down across from my desk without being invited, and said, "So you're the one who runs everything?" "I run operations," I said. "Yes. That talks about you like you're irreplaceable." He smiled when he said it, not warmly. "I've worked here for 8 years," I said. "I know the systems." "Right?" He nodded slowly, looking around my office with the expression of someone who is redesigning the room in their head while you're still in it. "Well, I'm going to be working closely with you. Dad wants me to understand the full operation before I take a bigger role. So, looking forward to it." He stood up, smiled again, and left. I watched him go and felt something cold settle into the back of my throat. The something he'd brought with him was named Jade. I didn't know that yet on that Tuesday morning. I found out 2 weeks later when Tyler sent a company-wide email introducing Jade Whitmore as the new head of brand experience and creative direction. Her background, per the email, included extensive work in lifestyle branding, content creation, and hospitality concepts. Her Instagram had 180,000 followers. Her LinkedIn listed 2 years at a marketing agency and a year doing social media for a boutique hotel in Santa Monica. She had 0 operational experience in food service. 0. She was going to be overseeing the rebrand of our 3 highest grossing locations. She also, as I learned 3 days later, when she walked into my office with a mood board and a matcha latte, apparently considered brand experience to include understanding how the back end of the business works. Tyler thinks it'll be valuable for me to shadow the ops side for a bit, she said, settling into the chair Tyler had used, crossing her legs, angling her phone toward me in a way that I suspected meant she was recording. Just to understand how everything connects. I looked at her. She looked at me. She had the energy of someone who was used to people being immediately charmed by her presence and was slightly confused when it wasn't working. What specifically are you hoping to understand? I asked. Like the systems, how the scheduling works, how payroll flows. I want to be able to speak to the operational infrastructure when we're talking to investors. Investors. This was the first I'd heard of investors. I'll block some time, I said, but I'd want to walk you through the documentation first. There's a lot of context that matters before the systems themselves make sense. She nodded like I'd said something very reasonable and then immediately looked down at her phone. Over the following weeks, I watched Tyler make decisions the way someone makes decisions when they've never experienced the consequences of being wrong. He decided our uniform brand was outdated and contracted a designer to create new ones without consulting any of the general managers about functionality. The new kitchen uniforms had no pockets, which, if you have ever worked in a kitchen, you understand is functionally insane. He decided we were over-indexed on operational complexity and proposed cutting my compliance specialist position because software can handle that. He went to 3 industry events and came back each time with a new idea that he presented to Daniel as strategy. Daniel was 69 by then. He'd had a minor cardiac event the previous spring, nothing catastrophic, but enough to slow him down. He was spending more time at his house in Gatlinburg. He took Tyler's involvement as a sign that he could finally exhale a little. I understood that. I didn't blame him for it. I blamed him for a lot of other things, but not for wanting to rest. I sent Tyler reports. Detailed ones with data, with projections, with clear explanations of what each proposed change would cost versus what it was supposed to save. He responded to most of them with short emails that said things like, "Appreciate the perspective, let's stay agile, and I think we're overthinking this." He was wrong about almost everything in ways I could quantify precisely. The new uniforms resulted in a 22% increase in order errors at 2 locations because line cooks had nowhere to keep their check tubes. The reduction in my compliance team's hours led to us nearly missing a health permit renewal in Asheville. I caught it on a Sunday evening, drove 40 minutes to the Walgreens that had a notary and got the paperwork filed with 4 hours to spare. I sent Tyler the documentation. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. One Tuesday afternoon, Jade appeared in my office doorway and asked if we could simplify the vendor payment schedule. I asked her what she meant by simplify. She said it seemed like we had a lot of vendors and a lot of different payment terms, and couldn't we just do 1 payment a day to everyone? I explained accounts payable, early payment discounts, net 30 terms, and the cash flow implications of restructuring our payment schedule. She listened with the expression of someone who has decided in advance that they are not the problem. Then she said, "I feel like you make things more complicated than they need to be." I went home that night and sat on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor, I just couldn't make it to the couch. And ate cold pad thai out of the container and stared at the white wall across from me. I was 32 years old. I had built something that employed 340 people. And I was explaining net 30 terms to someone whose qualifications for her position were a boyfriend and a mood board. I thought about calling my mother. She lived in Memphis, 60-something and sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who raised me to be capable and has never quite understood why capable doesn't always translate to protected. I didn't call her. I didn't know how to explain any of it without sounding like I was whining, and I hated the sound of my own whining more than I hated the situation. I started documenting everything, not just the operational stuff I'd always tracked, but every conversation with Tyler, every email, every decision I warned against and was ignored on. I created a folder on my personal drive. I did not give it a name that would be obvious if someone found it. I just kept filling it. I knew what was coming. The same way you know a storm is coming before the sky actually changes. Something in the pressure, something in the light. I knew. The question was only when. The calendar invite came on a Thursday afternoon. Quick check-in, Tyler plus HR, Friday 4 p.m. No agenda. ITER included. Friday afternoon. I sat with it for about 30 seconds, then went back to work. I had a vendor contract renewal to finalize and a staffing issue at the Charlotte location that needed resolution before Monday. I wasn't going to spend 20 hours catastrophizing about something I couldn't prevent. But I did one thing before I left Thursday night. I went into PulseTrack, the system I had built from nothing on 6 years of late nights and institutional knowledge no one else had ever tried to fully learn, and I verified something I had known for 3 years but never had reason to test. PulseTrack's payroll module ran through an integration with our payroll processor. That integration required active authentication through a secure token associated with my admin credentials. The reason for this architecture, and I had documented this clearly in the technical notes I'd filed with Daniel's IT consultant back in 2021, was to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive employee financial data. If my credentials were ever deactivated in the HR system, the authentication token would expire within 48 hours, and the payroll integration would suspend pending reauthorization by a credentialed admin. There was no other credentialed admin. I had suggested, 3 separate times in writing, that we should establish a secondary admin to serve as a redundancy. Tyler had said it wasn't a priority. Jade had once asked if we could just use Tyler's login for everything to streamline access. I had explained why that would create catastrophic audit exposure, and she had looked at me like I was describing a problem that existed in a different dimension than the one she lived in. The token would expire Saturday morning, 48 hours after my credentials were deactivated, which, based on every HR termination I'd ever processed in this system, would happen automatically within minutes of the paperwork being filed. Sunday brunch was our highest revenue service of the week across 6 of our 22 locations. Our payroll cycle closed Sunday night. I went home. I made actual dinner for once. Pasta with vegetables, nothing impressive, but real food on a real plate that I ate sitting at my kitchen table like a person. I called my mother. I told her things had been difficult at work. She said, "Maya, you have given that man 8 years. Whatever happens, you will land." I didn't tell her what I suspected was coming. I just listened to her voice for a while. I slept better than I had in months. Friday at 4 o'clock, I walked into the conference room at our Nashville flagship. Tyler sat at the head of the table. HR, a woman named Donna, who I had hired 3 years earlier and who looked like she genuinely wanted to disappear, sat to his left. Jade was not in the room, which I noted. Tyler did not waste time on preamble. He told me that Hargrove Hospitality was moving in a new creative and operational direction, that the company needed leadership with a more contemporary and collaborative style, and that my position was being eliminated effective immediately. I asked him to clarify what he meant by contemporary and collaborative. He said, "We need people who embrace change, Maya, who aren't protective of legacy systems and old processes." I looked at him for a moment. "You mean people like Jade?" He sat up straighter. "This isn't about Jade." 8 years, I said. "I built every system this company depends on. I grew you from 7 locations to 22. I have saved this company in documented and quantifiable ways over $1 million in operational efficiencies. And you're eliminating my position to make room for someone whose expertise is Instagram captions. I'd ask you to keep this professional, Tyler said. I am being professional, I said. Emotional would sound different. He told me I'd receive 2 weeks severance, a standard NDA, and that Donna would walk me out. He said it without meeting my eyes. I thought about a lot of things in that moment. About the 8 years. About the 340 employees whose paychecks ran through my system. About Daniel in Gatlinburg, resting, trusting that his son was learning the business. About the Sunday brunch service 39 hours away. I picked up my bag from the floor next to my chair. The payroll integration through PulseTrack runs on an authentication token tied to my admin credentials, I said, keeping my voice completely level. When HR processes my termination, that token will expire in 48 hours. Sunday morning. You have a payroll cycle closing Sunday night and brunch service at 6 locations that require access to PulseTrack for staffing and tip compliance. I would recommend you contact your IT consultant before that happens. Tyler's expression shifted. What do you mean it expires? It's in the technical documentation I filed in 2021. Section 4, subsection B. I recommended twice that you establish a secondary admin. You declined. I paused. Donna has my personal number if there are questions about the transition. I walked out. Behind me, I heard Tyler say something to Donna, his voice going up slightly. I didn't stop. I drove to my apartment, changed out of my work clothes, ordered Thai food. Different place than usual. I was trying something new, and sat on my couch watching a show I'd had in my queue for 4 months and never gotten around to. My phone buzzed at 7 p.m. Tyler. I let it ring. At 8, an unknown number, probably IT. At 9, Tyler again. I turned my phone face down and finished the show. Saturday morning, I woke up to 14 missed calls and a text from Priya that said, I don't know what's happening, but there are emails going to everyone, and Tyler is here at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, which has never happened in the entire time I've worked here. Are you okay? I texted her back, I'm okay. Give it a little time. The cascade, as I understood it from the calls I eventually returned, some of them, not Tyler's, went like this. Saturday afternoon, PulseTrack locked the payroll module. Tyler's IT guy tried to manually override it and triggered a secondary security protocol that locked out interface access entirely, a failsafe I'd built after a phishing attempt in 2020. The IT guy then attempted to rebuild the integration from scratch using documentation he found on the server, not understanding that the documentation I'd filed publicly was the architectural overview, not the implementation key. The implementation key existed in my personal technical notes, which were on my personal laptop, which had left the building with me on Friday. By Saturday evening, they were flying blind on payroll for 340 employees. Sunday brunch service started without staffing access. 3 of the 6 brunch locations had managers who'd been doing this long enough to run service on memory and paper. The other 3 did not. The Nashville flagship, the one Tyler had started calling the brand anchor, ran 2 hours behind on every ticket because without PulseTrack's staffing module, nobody had properly accounted for the staggered shifts Priya and I had been adjusting for the previous month's higher reservation volume. I know this because Priya texted me updates like a war correspondent. Front of house is walking in the wrong order. Someone is going to cry. 15 minutes later, someone cried. A server. Tyler is now on the floor trying to expedite, and he has never expedited in his life. Then, the kitchen just ran out of hollandaise. We have a 2-hour wait on eggs Benedict. Tyler just asked the chef if we can substitute mayonnaise. The chef has left the building. I was at a coffee shop on Gallatin Avenue when that last one came in. I set my cup down and pressed my lips together very hard to keep from laughing. My phone rang. Tyler, I answered. Fix this, he said. His voice was doing something between controlled panic and genuine desperation, which told me that whatever composure he was maintaining was costing him significantly. Whatever you need, name it, just fix this. I took a sip of coffee. Outside the window, a family was walking a very large dog that kept stopping to investigate a planter box. Normal Sunday. Unremarkable Sunday. You fired me, I said. Remember? Legacy systems, old processes, Maya. A different tone. Smaller. Please. There are servers who haven't gotten their paycheck. There are people who drove 45 minutes in this morning and can't clock in. I have a manager at the Asheville location calling me every 20 minutes. I thought about the 340 employees. I thought about them specifically, not abstractly, not as a number. I thought about Carmen at the Charlotte location, who was saving for her daughter's quinceañera. I thought about the dishwashers at our Knoxville original, 2 brothers who'd both been with us since year 2. I thought about Priya. There's a recovery protocol, I said. I wrote it in January 2023 in case I was ever in an accident or couldn't access the system in an emergency. It's in a sealed envelope in the filing cabinet in my office, former office, 3rd drawer behind the tax records for 2021. The envelope is labeled IT emergency. Do not open without authorization. Have your IT contact follow those instructions exactly. It'll take about 18 hours. Payroll will run correctly. The staffing module will restore. Silence on his end. Why, Tyler said finally, would you do that? Write a recovery protocol? I thought about how to answer that. Because I cared about the people who work here, I said. I was always planning for what would happen if I wasn't there. I just never planned for this specific reason. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the edge entirely. What do you want, Maya? To come back? Name the terms. I don't want to come back, I said. It came out more gently than I expected. But here's what I'd like. I'd like you to call your father today. Not to tell him about the system issues. To tell him what you did and why you did it. The real why. I think he deserves that. I hung up. I sat in the coffee shop for another hour. Finished my drink. Started another. Read the news. Watched the dog family come back the other direction. The dog was now carrying a stick that was impressively large relative to his body. I thought about the 8 years. About what they'd given me and what they'd cost me and whether those 2 columns balanced. They didn't balance. They never do. When you're young and good at something and you give it to people who don't fully see you, you think the work is enough. You think being indispensable is the same as being valued. It isn't. Those are entirely different things, and learning the difference costs something you don't get back. But sitting there, in the unremarkable sunlight of a Sunday morning in Nashville, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. My shoulders were down, not braced for the next crisis. Just down. I drove home, made lunch, called my mother. Daniel called me Monday evening. I'd half expected him to call Sunday, but I think it took him a full day to get the complete picture and to do whatever he needed to do with his feelings about it before he could call me. He sounded old, not the way he'd sounded old during his cardiac recovery. That had been a physical diminishment. This was something else. The specific sound of a man who has discovered that someone he trusted made a serious mistake and that he, the man on the phone, had let it happen. I know I don't have any standing to ask you for anything, he said. But I want you to know that I know what you built, and I know what my son did, and I am profoundly sorry. Thank you for saying that, I told him. Is there anything I can do? I thought about it. Really considered it. What I'd built over 8 years was gone, or effectively gone. Pulse Track belonged to Hargrove Hospitality, legally because I'd built it, on company time with company resources, as per the intellectual property clause in my original offer letter that I'd been 24 and too excited to really pass. Tyler would inherit the system eventually. Once IT restored it, he'd use it badly and probably pay someone else to rebuild parts of it in 2 years when it started showing the strain of being operated without understanding. There was nothing Daniel could give me that would undo any of that. Tell me one thing, I said. Honestly, did you know he was going to do this? When you brought him in, did you know he'd— No, Daniel said without hesitation. I thought he'd learn. I thought if I gave him access and time, he'd see what it took. I was wrong about that. A pause. I've been wrong about Tyler for a long time, in ways that are not your problem to absorb. Will you be okay? I asked. The business will survive. It's going to hurt and it's going to cost. And there are going to be consequences I can't fully see yet. But it'll survive. He paused again. I should have given you equity. I should have given you a contract. I should have protected you from this years ago when it was still preventable. I didn't, and I can't undo that. No, I said. You can't. We stayed on the phone a few more minutes. He asked about my next steps. I told him I had some things in progress, which was true, though I hadn't let myself think about it too clearly yet. It felt superstitious to plan before I'd fully processed leaving. Before we hung up, he said, "You were the best hire I ever made. I'm glad I got 8 years of you even if I didn't earn the last few." I cried after I hung up. Not the way I expected to cry. Not anger, not grief exactly. Just the release of a tension that had been in my body for so long I'd stopped noticing it was there. I went to bed early and woke up the next morning and made breakfast from actual ingredients for the first time in longer than I could remember. In the weeks that followed, I discovered something strange. The industry is small and information travels fast. Within 10 days of my termination becoming known, I had heard from 4 people. A regional director at a competing hospitality group in Charlotte, a family-owned hotel company in Asheville that was expanding its food and beverage operations and looking for someone to build their infrastructure from the ground up. A consultant who specialized in restaurant technology and wanted to bring me on as a partner, and a woman named Renata, who ran a mid-size catering and events company in Nashville and had been trying to hire someone with my particular combination of skills for 2 years. I took calls with all of them. I was honest about what had happened, not bitterly, just factually. An organizational restructuring, a shift in leadership priorities, an amicable departure from a company I'd invested significantly in. The people I spoke to read between the lines without difficulty. They'd all either been in my position or managed someone in my position. The restaurant industry contains an unusually high proportion of people who understand exactly what it looks like when competence gets edged out by proximity to power. Renata made me an offer that was better than anything I'd had at Hargrove. Title, salary, and a genuine equity stake, structured so that the value I created was actually mine to keep. I sat with it for 4 days before saying yes. I started the following Monday. Renata's office was in a converted Victorian in the Germantown neighborhood, all high ceilings and good natural light. My first morning there, I made coffee in a kitchen that had a real espresso machine and several people in it who were clearly delighted to be doing what they were doing. My new team lead, a guy named Oscar, who had 15 years of event operations experience, spent 45 minutes walking me through their existing systems and asking pointed questions about what I'd want to change, not telling me what to do, asking what I saw. I drove home that evening with the windows down. It was late spring and Nashville was doing the thing it does in May, where the light goes gold around 6 o'clock and everything smells like honeysuckle. I played music I hadn't listened to in years, loud enough that I had to actively not sing along while stopped at lights. I felt, I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make this sound like a clean ending, because it wasn't a clean ending. It was just a beginning. I felt like I was inhabiting my own life again, like I'd been adjacent to it for a long time, managing it from a distance and was now actually in the room. I called my best friend from college, Simone, who lived in Chicago and whom I had spoken to approximately 4 times in the past 2 years, all of them brief and work-adjacent. She answered on the second ring and said, "Oh my God, it's been forever." We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her job, her apartment, the disaster of her last relationship, and the surprising non-disaster of her current one. I told her about Hargrove, about Tyler, about Pulse Trek and the payroll module and the Sunday brunch service. She laughed so hard at the hollandaise part that she had to put the phone down. "You ate pad thai while their entire business was burning," she said. "Thai food," I said. "Different place than usual." "Maya." "I know." She flew in for a weekend 6 weeks later. We went to the farmer's market and to a concert in Centennial Park and to a wine bar where we stayed until last call. talking about everything we'd missed of each other's lives in the years I'd been disappearing into someone else's dream. On Sunday morning, over brunch at a place that was objectively better than anything we were serving at Hargrove on our best day, Simone looked at me across the table and said, "You look different." Different how? I don't know. Present? Like you're actually here instead of processing 7 problems in the background. I thought about that. I think I'm learning to only run one operating system at a time, I said. She did not fully understand the metaphor but laughed anyway. 6 months after I left Hargrove Hospitality, I ran into Tyler at an industry event in downtown Nashville. He was standing near the bar with a drink in his hand, looking slightly less expensive than he used to. His hair a little less styled. He saw me at almost the exact moment I saw him. He walked over. I let him. "I heard you landed somewhere good," he said. "I did," I said. "That's good." He nodded, looking at his glass. "I wanted to tell you, and I understand if you don't want to hear it, but I wanted to say that I know I handled things badly. With you, with the whole situation." He looked up. I thought I understood what I was walking into. I didn't. I looked at him for a moment. He was 31 years old, and he was going to be learning this lesson for a while longer yet. I could see it in the way he was standing, less like someone who expected the room to arrange itself around him, and more like someone who had recently discovered that rooms don't work that way. "Are you actually running the operations now?" I asked. "Trying to," he said. "It's hard. Harder than I thought it would be." A pause. "Jade's not with the company anymore." I nodded. I'd heard. "You were right about a lot of things," he said. "I think I knew that at the time and didn't want to deal with it." "You're telling the right person," I said. "But I think you probably owe that sentence to some other people more than you owe it to me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah, I know." I said goodnight. I found Oscar across the room and we spent 20 minutes talking about a project we were developing for a new client. Outside, the Nashville night was warm and loud and entirely indifferent to any of this. I drove home thinking about Daniel. He'd had a second cardiac event in March. Nothing devastating, but enough to make it clear that retirement wasn't optional anymore. He'd sold 4 of the Hargrove locations to a regional group, was holding on to the original Knoxville location, and 2 others that had sentimental value. Tyler was running the remainder. I hoped, genuinely, that he'd figure it out. Not because I owed him anything, but because there were still good people working there who deserved a place worth working at. I didn't have a neat resolution to offer about forgiveness or closure or the satisfying arc of getting exactly what you deserve. Real life doesn't run on those timelines. What I had was this. I'd built something real, and I'd been treated like I was replaceable when I wasn't. And that was a version of a story that happens all the time to people who are good at things that are hard to see from the outside. The person who keeps the payroll running, the person who renews the permits, the person who catches the vendor fraud and fixes the scheduling overlap and makes sure the new kitchen uniforms have pockets. The invisible architecture people, the foundations. We're everywhere, and we're worth more than 2 weeks, severance and a standard NDA. Most of us know that, eventually, even if it takes getting fired on a Friday afternoon to make it clear. I know it now. I know it sitting at my desk in Germantown with good coffee and actual windows, running systems that are mine in every sense that matters. I know it on the weekends when I leave work at a reasonable hour and don't spend Sunday evening preemptively bracing for Monday. I know it on the phone with my mother, who was right, as she tends to be. Whatever you built, wherever you built it, the ground under it is yours, even if someone takes the building. Especially then. If this story resonated with you, hit like and subscribe to Calista Tales for more stories about people who built more than they were given credit for. I read every comment, drop yours below. I've thought a lot about what actually caused all of this. Not Tyler's arrogance, not Jade's incompetence, not even Daniel's decision to step back and trust the wrong person. Those were all real. But they were symptoms. The actual cause ran deeper, and it took me a long time to see it clearly. For 8 years, I made myself indispensable, and then confused that with being safe. Those are not the same thing. Indispensable means people need what you do. Safe means people will protect you when it costs them something to do so. I had the first one completely. I never had the second one at all. And I never asked for it. Never built a contract around it. Never demanded equity or a seat at the table where real decisions got made. I told myself the work was enough proof that anyone paying attention could see what I was worth. That was naive in a way that embarrasses me now, not because I was foolish, but because I was smart enough to know better and chose not to look at it directly. What happened to me was the natural result of that choice. Not punishment, not cosmic justice, just cause and effect, plain and simple. I built something valuable on someone else's foundation without securing any stake in it. When the ownership changed hands, I had no claim. That outcome was always possible from day one. I just never made myself sit with that possibility until it was sitting in front of me in a conference room on a Friday afternoon. The intelligence I'm most proud of isn't pulse track. It's that I wrote the recovery protocol. 3 years before any of this happened, some part of me understood that systems which depend on a single person are fragile, and I prepared for my own absence, not as a weapon, but as an act of responsibility toward the people whose paychecks ran through my work. Carmen saving for her daughter's quinceañera, the 2 brothers at the Knoxville location, Priya. I didn't know Tyler was coming. I just knew that caring about something means preparing for the worst, not assuming the best. That's the version of intelligence I want to carry forward. Not cleverness that protects itself. Wisdom that protects other people, even when it has no obligation to. The moral piece is harder to talk about because it doesn't resolve neatly. I didn't go back and fix the system myself. I told Daniel where the recovery protocol was and let his team do the work. Some people would call that withholding. I call it the only boundary I had left to draw. I had spent 8 years giving everything I had to that company. Giving them my solution too after they fired me would have meant I'd learned nothing about what I was worth. Sometimes integrity looks like generosity. Sometimes it looks like holding a line. Knowing the difference is the whole thing. What I'm still learning, and I mean still, present tense, this is not a resolved story, is how to build something that's actually mine, not just in the legal sense, though that matters, and I now have an equity agreement I can read and a lawyer who reviewed it. I mean in the sense of building a life where the work is one part of it instead of the entire architecture. Simone flying in for a weekend, calling my mother not because something went wrong, but because I wanted to hear her voice. Leaving at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday without the background hum of guilt that used to follow me home every night for years. Those things require a different kind of discipline than building Pulse Track did. They require choosing yourself in small, undramatic ways, over and over, when nobody's watching and nothing's on fire. That's the hardest work I've ever done, and I'm just getting started.